Iran-Israel war, the conflict that changed the Middle East, two countries, two powerful militaries, decades of hostility, and a conflict that could reshape the entire Middle East. This is the story of Iran and Israel, and how years of confrontation eventually turned into direct war. To understand the Iran-Israel conflict, we have to go back to 1979. Before the Iranian Revolution, Iran and Israel maintained relatively cooperative relations. But after the Islamic Revolution, Iran's new government adopted a deeply hostile position toward Israel, and the relationship rapidly deteriorated. Over the following decades, the confrontation largely remained indirect. Iran expanded its regional influence and supported armed groups in Lebanon, Gaza, Syria, Iraq, and Yemen, while Israel carried out operations against Iranian forces and Iran-linked targets in the region. What began as a strategic rivalry gradually became one of the Middle East's most dangerous conflicts. For years, Iran and Israel avoided a full-scale direct war. But that changed dramatically in 2024. Iran launched a major missile and drone attack against Israel after an Israeli strike on an Iranian diplomatic compound in Damascus. Israel then responded with strikes inside Iran. For the first time, the long-running shadow war was becoming an open confrontation between the two states. October 2024 brought another major exchange. Iran launched ballistic missiles toward Israel, and Israel responded by targeting Iranian military infrastructure. The message was clear: the old rules were disappearing. At the center of the confrontation lies one of the world's most controversial security questions: Iran's nuclear program. Iran has consistently maintained that its nuclear program is intended for peaceful purposes. Israel, however, has repeatedly argued that a nuclear-armed Iran would represent an existential threat. Years of negotiations, sanctions, and international pressure failed to permanently resolve the dispute. And as tensions increased, the possibility of a much larger military confrontation became increasingly difficult to ignore. Then came February 28, 2026. The United States and Israel launched a major military campaign against Iran, striking military, nuclear, and government-related targets. Iran responded with missile and drone attacks against Israel and U.S. military positions across the region. What had once been a regional rivalry had now become a large-scale war involving multiple countries and armed groups. Visual map showing attacks spreading across the Middle East. The conflict was no longer limited to Iranian and Israeli territory. The Gulf, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, and surrounding waters were increasingly drawn into the crisis. And then came another major danger: the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway is one of the world's most important routes for energy transportation. As the war continued, Iran maintained that the strait would remain closed unless its conditions were met. The consequences were immediate. Shipping came under pressure, oil markets reacted, and governments around the world became increasingly concerned about the economic consequences of a prolonged conflict. But wars are not measured only by missiles and aircraft. They are measured by human lives. Families lose homes, cities lose infrastructure, economies suffer, and ordinary people pay the highest price for decisions made far away from the battlefield. The conflict has also created wider dangers for international trade and maritime security. In August 2026, attacks on commercial shipping around the region added another layer of uncertainty, while diplomatic efforts struggled to produce a lasting breakthrough. So why does a war between Iran and Israel matter to the entire world? Because the Middle East is connected to the global economy. Oil and gas supplies pass through the region. International shipping routes cross its waters. Major global powers have military bases and strategic interests there. And if the conflict expands further, its consequences could reach far beyond the borders of Iran and Israel. The biggest question is no longer simply who has the stronger military. The real question is, can diplomacy succeed before the conflict expands even further? Iran wants security guarantees and major changes to the pressure being placed on it. Israel wants guarantees that Iran cannot develop a nuclear weapon or maintain capabilities it considers an existential threat. The United States has its own strategic objectives. Finding common ground between these positions is extraordinarily difficult. The Iran-Israel conflict was not created in a single day. It was built over decades through revolution, ideology, regional rivalries, military operations, nuclear tensions, and repeated cycles of retaliation. Today, the battlefield may be thousands of kilometers away from many of us, but its consequences can be felt across the world. Because, in the modern age, a regional war can quickly become a global crisis. And perhaps the most important lesson of this conflict is simple. Wars may begin with missiles, but they end only when political leaders decide that another path is possible.